Hi everyone, this video is going to cover section 4.5 and we're going to be talking about the slope of a line. So our goal for today is to be able to find the slopes of lines, and we're going to learn how to do that in a couple of ways. So the first question we need to be able to answer is, what is the slope? And all slope does is the slope describes how steep a line is. And so when we start looking at graphs, we'll be talking about the slope, and we'll be using an important little formula to do this. Now, one thing I want to mention is a lot of times we use the letter M to represent slope. So when you see M equals, that means we're talking about the slope. And a formula that we'll be using quite a bit is rise over run, and that may be something that you've heard of. But that rise over run is going to help us to calculate the slope of a line, and we'll be using that in just a couple of minutes. So now we want to look at 4 examples of lines. We have 4 cases for the slope of a line. Now, when I look at a line, I'm always thinking about kind of maybe walking across that line from left to right. So I'm always starting at the left endpoint kind of and going to the right. And I'm thinking of what's happening as I'm moving along that line from left to right. In this case, it's pretty easy to see as I go from left to right, I'm going downhill. And in that case, we say we have a negative slope. So I'm going to say that's my downhill. Now in this case, as I go from left to right, I'm clearly walking uphill. And that's a positive slope. Now, these types of lines, and you remember hopefully this is what we have, our vertical lines. Those vertical lines have what we call an undefined slope. And then last but not least, our other types of lines, our horizontal lines here, have a 0 slope. And so one thing I want to mention, if you recall back when we talked about vertical lines, we said vertical lines, we used our little word vux. And we said V was vertical, and the X meant the equation was X equal. Well, now we know the U means vertical lines have an undefined slope. On the other hand, when we talked about horizontal lines, we kept saying hoi. Well, in this case, we want to think of that O really as a 0. Horizontal lines have 0 slope. So that might help you remember not only their equations, but their slopes as well. So this is just kind of classifying what type of slope it has, whether it's negative, positive, undefined, or 0. But now we sometimes want to find that slope and actually represent it numerically. So that's what we're going to do, is actually calculate specific slopes of lines. So in the next example, our directions say to find the slope. And here we're going to use rise over run, that formula I mentioned up at the top. So I'm going to be finding the slope between these 2 points. Now, when I'm finding the slope, I always start with the point furthest left. So I'm going to start at this point. And so I know the numerator, the top of my slope, is the rise. So how far up do I have to go to get from this point to this point? So going straight up, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm at kind of the same level as that. So I know my top, my rise, is 4. So put that here. And now I have to run. So I say, how far to the right do I need to go? And I go over 2. So my slope is 4 over 2. But now we wouldn't leave that as 4 over 2. I know 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I know I have a positive slope, and that slope of 2. And I always recommend doing a quick check. If I have a positive slope, my line should be going uphill. And if I look back at my line, it is. So that answer seems reasonable. Now, let's look at the next one. Same idea. I'm going to start at the point furthest to the left. But what I notice now is that instead of rising, I'm actually going down. So I'm going to count down, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7. But now since I went down, that's going to be a negative for my rise. So now I have m equals, remember that means slope. I have negative 7 in my numerator. Now I'm running to the right, so my run will be positive, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces to the right. So my denominator is 5. So now go ahead and try the next one. Pause the video, and then we'll check back in. Okay, so for this one, for my slope, m equals, I'm starting at the left-hand point, and I notice I need to go up, so I'm going to have a positive rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then my run is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I get 5 over 5, which I'm just going to simplify to 1. Again, my slope is positive and my line is going uphill, so those match. So that's how we're finding the slope if we're given the graph. Now, we won't always be given the graph. So on the next page, we're going to be learning something that we call the slope formula. And we're going to use this if you are given the coordinates of 2 points. So let's say we're given the coordinates of 2 points. And I'm going to call those 2 points just generically x1 and y1 and x2 and y2. So those are my 2 points. Again, I just use the 1 here to represent the first point and the 2's here to represent the second point. So my slope formula says to find the slope if I'm given points, I'm going to take my y2 minus y1, so the difference in my y coordinates, over the difference in my x coordinates. So here's how we're going to apply this formula. I find that it's really helpful to label my points. So my first point I'm going to label x1, y1, and my second point will be x2, y2. Let me see if I can focus this a little better. Okay, not sure if that's better, but we'll go with that. So now my formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And I'm just going to substitute. y2 is negative 7 minus y1 is 8 over x2 is 7 minus my x1 is 3. So if I simplify that, negative 7 minus 8 is a negative 15, and my numerator, 7 minus 3, is 4. And that's my slope. Okay, again, for B, I'm going to label these x1, y1, and x2, y2. I'm going to apply my formula again. So m equals y2, which is 4. Now here we have to be really careful with our signs. I have 4 minus my y1 is a negative 3. So I make sure I hold on to that negative. In the denominator, I have x2 is negative 3 minus, and my x1 is a negative 8. So when I go to simplify this, subtracting a negative I know is the same as adding. So 4 minus a negative 3 is the same as 4 plus 3, so I get 7. On the bottom I have negative 3 minus a negative 8, same thing as negative 3 plus 8, and I get 5. So my slope is 7/5. Okay, at this point I want you to try this last one. We're going to skip this one in the interest of time. Go ahead and try the last one. Again, pause the video and then go ahead and hit play when you're ready. So now we're going to use our slope formula. I've got my points labeled x1, y1, x2, y2. So my formula says to take y2 and subtract y1. And on the bottom I have my x2 minus x1 is a -5. So I get 9 minus 3 is 6. 7 minus a -5 is the same as 7 plus 5, and I get 12. Now, I know I can reduce this fraction. If I divide my numerator by 6, I get 1. And I'm going to divide my denominator by 6, and I get 2. So my slope is 1/2. Okay, let's try a couple more of these kind of special cases here. So we're still finding the slope. So this is our slope formula again. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So my slope is y2 minus y1. So -9, minus 1. Now on the bottom, x2 is -6 minus x1 is a -6. Now when I do this, -9 minus 1 is a -10. -6 minus a -6 is the same as -6 plus 6, which if I go to my calculator and do that, I get 0. Now here we have a problem because we are never allowed to divide by 0. If you try in your calculator, and let's go ahead and do that, -10 divided by 0, we get an error. So in this case, when that happens, our slope is undefined. So whenever we divide by 0, that means our slope is undefined. Now in part B, again, I'm going to label my points. I'm still finding the slope. So my slope is 9 minus 9 over -1 minus a -8. Now here in my numerator, I'm going to get 0 over, my bottom comes out of 7. Now dividing, if I have 0 on top, that's actually okay. If I divide, let's see, can we see that? 0 divided by 7, that just gives me 0. So in this case, my slope is 0. Something that might help you remember the distance, or the difference between these two, right? So I always think it's never okay, it's a no to divide by 0. But it's okay if O is in my numerator. So whenever I have a divide by 0, that's a no, I'm undefined. If my 0 is in the numerator though, that's okay, and my slope is 0. So to finish this out, go ahead and try the last one, and then we'll check. So I'm going to start off by labeling my ordered pairs. Now I just plug it into my formula. I get -8 minus 5 over 2 minus 2. If I simplify, -8 minus 5 gives me a -13. 2 minus 2 is 0, and here I notice, again, there's my dividing by 0 error, and so I know my slope is undefined. So that is all we need to do for slope right now, and you can go ahead and do that homework assignment.